Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Mirror Dungeon solo video. Today we'll be using the hottest identity in the game, Liu Gregor. Being a launch identity, it's safe to say he's not a particularly powerful character. In fact, most of the time his rolls are so far below average that he can almost never win any clashes. Both his skill 1 and 2 have coin power conditionals tied to burn, and while burn conditionals are some of the easiest to fulfill, they only serve to make his rolls slightly better than completely useless. Despite this though, I would still argue and say that he is actually a decent burn identity. Obviously, he doesn't hold a candle to the 3-star identities, but when compared to the 2 stars, you could easily end up picking him over the rest. The one thing he does better than any other identity, including the 3 stars, is burn potency, with 4, 5, and 6 on each of his skills. If you want to build a burn stack as quickly as possible, he is going to be on the team as his potency is too good to pass up. Of course, when it comes to soloing, having exclusively burned potency is a massive detriment as you cannot build a burn stack at all. That is, unless you're using Liu Honglu's support passive, which I wasn't because I forgot about it, and Feng Hun Honglu's support passive is the better one anyway. Still, even with the ability to build a massive burn stack incredibly easily, his poor clash power can prove to be quite a nuisance. Fortunately, when he's alone, he does have one other small detail that helps alleviate this problem. His skill 2 when attacking an enemy with at least 6 burn will give him 1 attack power up at the next turn. A single attack power up is rarely going to make a difference most of the time. Going from 14 clash power to 15 is barely even noticeable after all. However, when he has multiple skill slots and can use more than one skill 2 in a single turn, that attack power really starts to add up. 14 clash power buffed to 16 or even 17 is significantly better. The only unfortunate thing is that it's only really viable when he's soloing, as you're almost never going to be giving him a second skill slot otherwise. Starting the run off, we take all 3 of the burn gifts as our starting gifts and pick the outcast for the first floor. We managed to find Bloody Gadget before the boss against the Ebony Queen's Apple. All of the potential bosses on this floor are not that difficult, and the Apple is no exception. The scariest thing about her is that we are fatal to pierce damage, but with how low her rolls are, they aren't anything we need to really be worried about. We take coffee and cranes for our reward and head into Lake World for the next floor. Here we buy Polarization, Dust to Dust, and an extra skill 2 before making it to the boss against the Twin Hook Pirates. This fight is really not that bad. The worst thing that they can do is inflict us with a ton of bleed, but with how little attacks start coming our way and Feng Hun Honglu's support passive existing, bleed is more or less a non-issue. The real thing that makes this fight easy though is their blunt weakness. Pretty much any one of our skill 2s or 3s is more than enough to insta-kill every enemy, and if for whatever reason it doesn't, burn usually finishes them off at the end of the turn anyway.
조금씩 나아가고 있네요. 그대로 가보자고. 제 앞에 책이 큰 준 것 같아. 일품의 직원과의 완벽한 공격이었어. 이제야 실력을 좀 내시네요. 평소에도 이러면 얼마나 좋겠는데. 아까 했던 공격 덕에. 그대로 가보자고. 대성공이야. 다른 신나. 노래 부를까? 끝난다. 그대로 가보자고. 잘 가는군. 다음. 어떻게 하신 거죠? 깜짝 놀랐어요. 너무 세게 맞은 거다. 완전 프레스 선택이었어. 그대로 가보자고. 잘 활력이 잘 드네요. 아마 그 공격이 약점이었겠죠?
We take Burning Intellect for our reward and head into Emotional Repression for the next floor. Here we fuse Ardent Flower before making it to the boss against Santata. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I hate this boss. I hate him more than every other boss in the game. And it's not because he's too difficult or too easy or even being a boring fight. I mean, he is a boring fight, but that's unrelated. No, the reason I hate him is because he's the only boss in the game who isn't a boss on his own floor. Every other floor has their respective boss fights, but for whatever reason, that's not the case for him. You just fight some random boring enemies for 4 waves and that's it. Anyway, this fight itself would be a lot better if it was exclusively against Santata. He's not that scary of a boss and really doesn't need the extra setup to prepare for him. If they changed his fight to be like that, I'd be a lot happier and probably end up choosing floors with him on it more often.
저 개체부터 처리하면 편할 것 같아요.
We take Ashes to Ashes for our reward and receive Charred Disc as a bonus before heading into Trickled Sanguine Blood for the next floor. Here we buy Melted Paraffin, Imposed Weight, and Phlebotomy Pack before making it to the boss against the Fairy Longlegs. This is a very difficult encounter for a multitude of different reasons. The first is that we are fatal to pierce damage, and while the fairy does have a few pierce skills, he doesn't have enough to really make it that threatening. It only really starts to become a problem when you take into account the sheer amount of bleed that he can inflict. These two issues combine together in such a bad way because his pierce skills are not the skills that are inflicting the bleed, which forces us to essentially choose between tanking the bleed damage or the pierce damage. Obviously, the answer is to tank the pierce damage because bleed is just so much worse, but that brings us to our second main problem. We can't clash. This is the first fight where Gregor's terrible clashing comes into play and forces us to do a few very specific things. The first is to continuously reset until Dust to Dust applies onto the fairy's arm, as it only applies to a single part in Abno fights, and we need the extra coin power for our skills to be able to actually hope to win any clashes. Second, we used Solemn Lament to gain attack power up at the end of a turn if we have a debuff, which we almost always do thanks to bleed, and finally, get a little lucky. Even after all of this, and spamming a few skill 2s, our clash power is still not good enough to consistently beat the fairy, and we have to rely on him rolling tails in order to win.
자, 이걸로 대신하지.
승객이 딱품 한 번 먹었어. 저희 직원들이 개체의 부위를 파괴했어요. 역시 미리 훈련하길 잘했죠? 퍼펙트! 모자를 쓰고 있는 당신에게 방망이 대신 풍선판이 정답이에요.
그대로 가보자고.
We take today's expression for our reward and head into Unbound Wrath for the final floor. Here we buy Eclipse of Scarlet Moths and Illusory Hunt before making it to the final boss against the great and powerful Papa Bongi.
이제는
This fight is not that difficult, all things considered. However, it does possess one aspect that can make it somewhat challenging. All of Gregor's good egos and the egos I would normally run are fatal to wrath damage. To turn off that weakness, you either need to run Gregor's base ego, Bygone Days, or AEDD. However, by doing that, you need to sacrifice running Legerdemain, Lantern, or Solemn Lament, all of which are significantly better than their alternatives. When soloing though, you pretty much are required to give up one of them, as having a permanent weakness is not something you can really afford to do, and I learned that the hard way. This is actually the second attempt at this run. The first was ended at the final boss against the Gossipium, not because of bleed, but because I couldn't turn off my wrath weakness. If you ever try to do a solo run with any character, make sure you can change your resistances, otherwise you risk running into a fight that's genuinely impossible.
위험을 모르는 건 나쁘지 않습니다만
제대로 가보자고.
본인이 방금 뭘 본 것인가?
제대로 가보자고.
저한테 되게 큰 소리 준것 같아. 우리 한쪽이 떨어져라 만나서 모험에서도 승리기 떡한 한방 먹였어.
아, 너무 열심히 했어. 이걸로 일주일은 울고 먹을 수 있겠군.
And that's how I soloed Mirror Dungeon 4 hard using only Liu Gregor. He certainly surprised me with how well he did. That attack power from his skill 2 really makes him so much better to play with. He may struggle the first few turns of a fight, but once you can get a few of them off, he becomes significantly better. Anyway, that's it from me. Like and subscribe to not miss next time where we'll be using this character. Goodbye!